This is Dade Battlefield, Historic State Park. It's located in Florida, and it was the site of a Second Seminole War battle. The first battle of the Second Seminole War took place in December 28, 1835. It was a massacre of over 100 U.S. troops. So come join us and let's investigate this battle. So we're going to follow the path of Major Dade and his contingent as they marched from Fort Brooke in present-day Tampa to Fort King in present-day Ocala. It was a military road. So to give some background, the Indian Removal Act of 1830 and the Treaty of Payne's Landing, signed by the Seminole chiefs on March 28, 1833, and ratified by the U.S. Congress in April of 1834, legalized the Seminole removal from Florida to a reservation west in Indian Territory. The Seminoles were furious at the U.S. attempts to forcefully relocate them and became increasingly hostile throughout 1835. Brigadier General Duncan L. Clinch, U.S. Army commander in Florida, was concerned by the Seminole aggressions and requested additional military support. U.S. War Department substantially increased U.S. military presence in Florida to protect American settlers and enforce the terms of the treaty removing the Seminoles from Florida. In December 1835, the U.S. Army had 11 companies, totaling 550 soldiers in Florida. Fort King was defended by one company, and it was feared was vulnerable to being overrun by the Seminoles. Two new companies were being transported to Fort Brooke by sea, so it was decided to send two of Fort Brooke's current companies north to reinforce Fort King. On December 23, 1835, two U.S. Army companies totaling 8 officers and 102 troops under the command of Major Francis Langhorne Dade departed from Fort Brooke and marched north along Fort King Military Road toward Fort King. Dade and his troops were aware that the Seminoles were shadowing their movements, and Dade had scouts posted on his flanks. Dade feared an attack could occur during a river crossing or in the thicker woods on the southern portion of the road. The regiment safely passed through the treacherous areas. Therefore, Major Dade recalled his scouts to speed up his march. Seminoles were intent on ambushing the column, but were waiting to coordinate their attack with Osceola, one of the most respected Seminole warrior leaders, who was busy assassinating the Indian agent General Wiley Thompson at Fort King on December 28, 1835, simultaneously with the planned Seminole ambush of Major Dade's column. On the 5th day of the march, while passing through a high hammock populated by pine trees, cabbage palms, and saw palmetto, 25 miles south of Fort King, the Seminole ambush was unleashed. 180 Seminoles laid in wait, crouching among the saw palmetto and utilizing the element of complete surprise. At 8 a.m., Chief Jumper gave a war whoop, signaling Chief Micanopy to fire a single fatal shot that instantly killed Major Francis Dade on horseback. Immediately, 180 Seminoles unleashed a swarm of bullets on the U.S. Army column from the west side of the road on the soldiers' left flank, which was aligned in 2 single files. This is the memorial to Major Francis Dade. The first volley felled half of the U.S. regiment, killing Captain Frazier, mortally wounding Lieutenant Mudge and Lieutenant Kellis, and wounding Lieutenant Henderson in his arm. Following Major Dade's death, command passed to Captain George W. Gardner, whose bravery impressed the Seminoles. Surviving soldiers fired their muskets at the Seminoles, hidden in the pine and the palmetto. Artillerymen, led by Lieutenant Basinger, fired their cannon several times, but the men who loaded it were shot down as soon as the smoke cleared. But the cannon fire managed to force a temporary Seminole retreat. This is a memorial to Lieutenant Mudge. This is a memorial to Captain Frazier. During the Seminole withdrawal, Captain Gardner ordered the construction of pine breastworks by 6 survivors. While the pine logs were only piled too high, Jumper, Alligator, and 10 Seminole warriors returned and killed the survivors by 4 p.m. Captain Gardner and Lieutenant Henderson were mortally wounded during the second attack. The Seminoles took food, clothing, guns, and ammunition, leaving dozens of wounded soldiers scattered along the road in agony. When the Seminoles departed, about 50 escaped black slaves killed the wounded and looted the dead. Lieutenant Basinger pleaded for his life, but he was hacked to death. The guide and interpreter Louis Pacheco, a black man, was captured hiding behind a tree, but he was spared by the black Seminoles. In all, the U.S. Army suffered 108 killed of the 110-man column. The Seminoles suffered 3 killed and 5 wounded. 4 U.S. soldiers initially survived the massacre. Private Edward DeCourcy was covered by dead bodies. Private Ransom Clark, badly wounded, was stripped by an escaped black slave who remarked, "He's dead enough." Private Joseph Wilson believed the Seminoles and blacks had departed, sprang over the breastworks, but was instantly shot dead by a Seminole. DeCourcy and Clark waited until nightfall, then attempted to make their way back to Fort Brooke. The next day, December 29th, they were spotted by a Seminole on horseback, who pursued them. The soldiers split up, and the Seminoles followed and killed DeCourcy. Clark managed to hobble back to Fort Brooke, collapsing 1 mile outside the fort on December 30th. He was helped to the fort by a friendly Seminole woman. A second survivor, Private Joseph Sprague, also managed to return to Fort Brooke 2 days later, on New Year's Day, 1836, having suffered only an arm wound. News of the Dade massacre caused widespread panic among the white settlers of Florida, who fled to St. Augustine and other strongholds protected by the U.S. Army. Over the ensuing months, the Seminoles burned hundreds of farms and plantations south of St. Augustine. Thus began a long 7-year war that cost the United States government $20 million and took the lives of 1,400 soldiers and hundreds of American settlers. About 4,000 Seminoles were relocated west to Indian Territory. 5,000 were killed, and about 300 survived the war in the Everglades, and their descendants live there to this day. It wasn't until 7 weeks later, on February 20th, 1836, that an expedition led by General Gaines arrived to survey the deadly outcome of this battle and to bury the dead. This is the Pine Flatwoods Trail. It's part of the Dade Battlefield Historic State Park. It shows what the terrain actually looked like at the time of the battle in 1835, which consisted mostly of pine and palmetto. And today it's been overgrown by a lot of live oak, which was more sparse at the time of the battle. A little history of the Seminoles. The Dade battlefield was during the Second Seminole War, but there was a First Seminole War. This is a game related to lacrosse that the Seminoles played for centuries. In 1821, Florida became a territory, and they started to want the Seminole lands. Some old artifacts from pioneers. So, war started with President Andrew Jackson, determined to remove the Indians, including the Seminole Indians, from Florida. And Osceola, famous scene of him putting a knife through the treaty that would have sent the Seminoles to the Indian Territory. They refused and war broke out. The first battle of that war was the Dade Battle. And a soldier in his military uniform, as would be worn by the troops at the Battle of Dade. A Seminole warrior. A number of artifacts, including part of a container, some lead shot, a fastener, rifle butt plates, buttons, and buckles. All right, so this is a flintlock musket of used from 1816, but is a 1838 production of this weapon. Now, this cloth was found on Lieutenant Basinger's body 54 days after the battle. On the top is an embroidered leather money belt, and then on the bottom is a silk sash worn by officers. A diorama of the Seminoles waiting in the pine barrens, getting ready to strike Dade's command. So a depiction of the battle where Lieutenant William Basinger, he's one of the few men left on the standing. He spoke to his men, "Boys, I'm the only officer left. Let's do the best we can." So if you enjoyed this tour of the Dade Battlefield Historic State Park, please click like, subscribe to our channel, and we will see you on our next adventure.